Anna had spent years trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. When she had first met Daniel, he had been everything she thought she wanted. Charming, successful, and deeply attentive. He had swept her off her feet with grand gestures, whispered promises, and an intensity that made her feel like the center of his world. But love had turned to control, and control had turned to cruelty. At first, it had been the little things, a sharp tone, a dismissive glance, a firm grip on her wrist that lingered too long. She told herself it was just his stress, just his way of handling frustration, and that he would return to the man she fell in love with. But the first slap changed everything. It had come out of nowhere, shocking both of them. Daniel had dropped to his knees afterward, crying, swearing it would never happen again. He had held her close, apologizing over and over, blaming work, blaming his temper, blaming himself. She had believed him, she had stayed. The next time, it wasn't a slap. It was a shove, one that sent her stumbling into the kitchen counter. He hadn't apologized that time. He had simply gone to bed as if nothing had happened. As months passed, his temper grew shorter, his words sharper, and his hands heavier. The worst part wasn't the bruises. It was the silence. She had learned to keep her head down, to avoid anything that might trigger his wrath, to disappear into herself. One evening, she prepared his favorite meal, hoping to keep the peace. The sound of his car in the driveway sent the usual ripple of dread through her, a sensation she had grown so used to that she barely noticed it anymore. She placed the last plate on the table just as the front door opened. Daniel stepped inside, his expression already dark. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, his movements tense. She could tell he had been drinking, just enough to strip away the last bit of patience he had. The moment he saw her, his eyes narrowed. "What the hell is this?" he snapped, pointing at the table. "Dinner," she said softly. He scoffed. "You think this makes up for how useless you are?" She didn't answer. She had learned by now that there was no right response. In an instant, he knocked the plate from the table. Food splattered across the floor, the plate shattering against the tiles. The next moment, his hand lashed out, striking her across the face. Pain shot through her cheek, but something inside her shifted. She didn't cry. She didn't shrink away. She stood still, her eyes locking onto his. "Enough," she whispered. Daniel let out a short laugh. "Enough?" He stepped closer, towering over her. "And what exactly are you going to do about it?" Anna didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out her phone. With a single tap, the screen lit up, revealing a recording in progress. His face changed. For the first time, she saw something flicker behind his rage. Hesitation. He lunged forward, trying to grab the phone from her hand, but before he could touch her, loud knocks pounded against the front door. "Police! Open up!" Daniel froze. The color drained from his face. Anna didn't move as the door burst open, and two uniformed officers stepped inside. "We received a call about a domestic disturbance," one of them said, scanning the room. His gaze landed on Anna's bruised face, then dropped to the shattered plate and spilled food. His jaw tightened. "Sir, we need you to step back!" Daniel clenched his fists, his eyes darting between the officers and his wife. "This is ridiculous! She's my wife! This is our home! This is a private matter!" "Not anymore," the officer said. Anna stood still as they moved toward Daniel, placing him in handcuffs. He struggled at first, then went eerily silent. As they led him toward the door, he turned to Anna, his expression unreadable. "You think you've won?" he spat. She met his gaze without fear. "No," she said quietly. "I think I'm free." For the first time in years, the weight in her chest lifted. As the door closed behind them, taking Daniel and his darkness with it, she let out a slow breath. The silence that followed was not the kind she had grown used to. It wasn't suffocating. It wasn't filled with dread. It was peaceful,